Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the regional week. For the first presentation today, we have Al, who's going to introduce you to our guest. So, Al, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We're really pleased to have this session today on supply issues in Western Canada, supply chain issues. Our special guest today is Liz Kovach, President of the Western Regional Lumber Association. Thank you, Liz. It's great that you could be with us today. And we're looking to Liz to kind of give us the big picture of how the supply chain issues are affecting the prairies, the Western Canada. Clearly, it's an issue from coast to coast, but our focus in this session is going to be the prairies. Our other panelists are Rick Priest with the Everlast Group, located in a prominent place, Wizard Lake, Alberta, and Nicole Bird of RSVP Design in Edmonton. So thank you, our panelists. And of course, Terry Adamson is going to be available as well to jump in as he wishes. He's our technical director here at Western Canada. So we'll start with an introductory talk by Liz, and then we'll chat. And we certainly welcome those online who are viewing this presentation live to join us with your questions. You can use the chat or the Q&A to do so. And following Liz's presentation, we'll begin a discussion with Nicole and Rick. So thank you, Liz, for being with us.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get started, let me just, my co-chairperson here, Nicole, is with us as well. So let me just introduce, we'll do a little introduction. And first of all, a big thank you to our sponsor, Roto Hardware. The topic that we're having today is handling chain supply issues in the prairies. Today's guest, as you all know, is Liz Kovach. She is president of the WRLA, Western Retail Lumber Association. The WRLA is a member-based organization that advocates, connects, and educates the building industry in Western Canada to facilitate the growth of smaller businesses, member businesses. WRLA is very connected to the current supply chain challenges, providing a building materials update via their advocacy bulletin page at wrla.org.
Hi, and I'm Nicole Bird. I'm with RSVP Design, and thank you again, Liz. Liz has joined the WRLA almost 5 years ago and is committed to evolve the WRLA to the best association it can be for its members and associated partners. Her commitment to the best interest of members is evident in her relationships established, increased awareness of the industry and advocacy work, which continues to strengthen the WRLA's relationship with the government and industry stakeholders. In her spare time, Liz is very involved in the Hungarian community, and she also enjoys spending time out at the lake with her husband, Jeff, stepdaughter, Tegan, and family puppy dog, Lucy. Swimming, running, cycling, fishing, and chopping wood are among her favorite pastimes and hobbies.
All right, well, thank you for joining us, Liz, and we will now turn it over to you.
Awesome. As we were talking there, I had my first glitch, which is that my Zoom disappeared from my screen. So I'm just going to try and get my screen up, which is not working at the moment. So
we can see you though, so
as long as you can see
something's working. Yes.
Okay, as long as you can see me, that's great. I'm going to try and get my Zoom screen. It's not allowing me to share my presentation at the moment, so this is kind of a challenge because I would like you to be able to see it. I do have one funny image. It's the entire topic itself obviously has not been very comical. It's been a huge challenge, as we all know, but not the funnest. So I'll dive into it. Actually, maybe what I'll do is I can...
Well, you can try again, maybe. I just looked.
Yeah.
It seemed to be okay, but
yeah, I'm just...
We can take a minute to make it work.
Yeah, I apologize for that. It's just
it's
that
okay.
My entire Zoom my banner has completely disappeared on me. There we go. Oh, come on.
This always happens when we're in the middle of a presentation.
It always does, yes.
Okay, I can see you on the bottom of my screen, but it's a little bit frozen. So let's see if I can make an adjustment here. If not, I will just start diving into the presentation just for the sake of time and to make sure that we can get into this. So just a little bit about who we are and what our role is. We did talk a little bit about it in the introduction, but we've been around for 131 years. And I can tell you that if somebody would have said to me that part of my job would be to be helping organizations survive during, would never believe them. And I'm sure all of you feel the same way about your roles. Nonetheless, though, we are here and we're doing our best to navigate through that with our members and of course with all of our industry partners. One of our biggest roles, as we talked about, is we are a member of Reshoring Canada, but our members are primarily based in the West, and our members play a vital role in the supply of building materials, whether to the construction sector. So that's either through manufacturing, distribution, retail. They play a huge role, and obviously we know what that impact is on our economy. It is massive. We're one of the larger industries in Canada. One of our biggest roles through this whole entire pandemic situation has been to be there as a resource for our members, to help navigate some of the information that was coming at us from the government, some of the support programs that were available during a time when there were more questions than there were answers. So that was certainly something we wanted to help navigate our members through. And I'm not sure if you recall what March was like last year, but there were a lot of businesses that were preparing to close. There was a lot of tough conversations being had and getting an understanding of what some of the impacts that our members were going through was very real. It was a very humbling experience, and I'm really glad that that's not where we're at anymore. But it certainly gave us an insight to some of the challenges that a lot of business owners and a lot of organizations went through. Another big piece of what we did was advocate to the government, and we spent a lot of time communicating with government, whether it was with the Western provinces, whether it was federally. We wanted to make sure that as we were progressing through the different phases of the pandemic, that our industry was looked at as a very important and strategic partner in that recovery. And some of that included advocating for tax credits and for eco retrofit rebates, which clearly we're very excited that we've made some progress, and we worked with the Home Builders Association on that as well. And you know, we were really excited to see these announcements last year, but then of course it was adding fuel to a fire when you look at what's happening on the actual supply side. But we are excited to be able to at least look forward to some of the long-term impacts that will have on our industry as we move out of these different phases. And we also did have a lot of conversation with the federal government as well as Transport Canada. The transportation issues were real. There was a lot of concerns all of last year, and they continue to be there. And we wanted to make sure that we were voicing the concerns of our industry and really sharing with them the impact that some of the container issues and the costs were having on our member businesses. And we wanted to make sure that there was still some priority that was being assigned to help support that and get an understanding of where international relations were on that. We're still working on that piece. Obviously, sometimes working with government, it's definitely a marathon and not a race. It takes a lot of time to get some progress there, but it's something that we're continuing to do. And we're also in the process of, and we've continued to just track a lot of the issues and share what some of those issues are with the broader stakeholder groups. Last year, when we initially started to go through this pandemic, some of the phone calls I was receiving were very angry, and I could totally understand where people were coming from. But there was a lot of finger pointing that was happening at the time as to whose fault, who's to blame. And I think it's fair to say that there really isn't one group that you can blame. And truly, there's a compilation of issues that have brought us to where we are today. You can't see this at the moment, but my presentation is titled The Perfect Storm. And it goes issues going beyond lumber. So my next slide, which you can't see at the moment, is actually, if you want to visualize this, it's a picture of Bill Murray holding a groundhog from Groundhog Day. To be very honest with you, this has been a Groundhog Day type situation for a lot of our members and our suppliers, because they're experiencing a lot of the same conversation every day. And I think all of us want to wake up every day and say, are we there yet? Are we past this? And we're not quite there. So just to dive into some of the key issues that are impacting the supply chain, and I'll go through these, and I can also send a presentation afterwards. Then we'll have some time for some conversation. And if you have any questions about specific product lines, I will be very much happy to review that with you. But when we look at some of the factors, there's a barrage of issues that we have been impacted with. The biggest disruptor that we really have experienced is COVID. There is no question that that has put the largest pressure on our global supply chain. All that did was continue to create issues further down the line. And when we look at where we were last year, there was a need for a lot of PPE. A lot of manufacturing facilities had to retool in order to produce some of that material. Obviously, the PPE required a lot of containers to be used, whether it was from individual packaging, such as plastic bottles or spray cans for sanitizer, and whether it was actual containers that needed to transport the materials to various parts of the globe. That was a huge issue. And what that created is, to some extent, is a bit of a backlog in terms of where containers were taken, not being able to be brought back, and that created a shortage from that perspective. We had a very strong DIY and housing market, and the housing market, it still remains high, obviously, across both Canada and the United States. With people not being able to travel, it really did put a lot of pressure on the industry. And you know, we joked last year about trying to find a piece of treated lumber was more rare than gold. So, and we all saw some of the memes that were going around, and some of the social media posts that poked a little bit of fun at it, but that was the situation that we were in. And that demand truly has impacted how much material was available. And if we want to rewind back a little bit, when it comes to the purchase of certain materials or booking of commodity type materials, the purchasing structures have changed a little bit in that it takes a lot of time to make some of the materials, whether if you look at lumber, it needs to be harvested, dried, treated, etc. A lot of those bookings need to be placed in October or November so that they can be delivered in the spring. So people are working, they're planning their budgets, they're planning their projects for next year. So you have businesses very much working on, okay, we know that this is what the demand is going to look like. But when the DIY market then came into play, it certainly threw all of that out of whack. And I don't envy anyone who has to budget and try and figure out what next year is going to look like, because you can't really use the data from this year and much of last year to really build that. Access to raw materials is another massive issue that we've run into. And everyone's competing for the same material globally. When you take a look at resins as an example, no one really used to talk about resins that much, but we found out that a lot of the resins that are synthesized and produced are done so in the Gulf Coast. And when you have a hurricane season, it certainly has an impact on what is able to be done. And when we look at what happened with some of our plants, some of them had over 5,000 leaks in one facility, and it took a long time for them to actually be able to recover from that. And although I can't share my screen with you at the moment, it did work during practice. Back at the end of August, just to give you an idea of where we were at, out of the 168 storm damaged plants, there was 154 that were back to 90% capacity. Of course, the recent hurricanes have created a little bit of a regression as the plants are trying to restore their stocks. That then now has had some setbacks due to Hurricane Ida and Nicholas as a result. And of course, they're trying to ramp up their production as much as possible, because resins are the base of so many different products, whether it's insulation, adhesives, paints, finishes, engineered wood products. It plays a significant role. We are also at a demand for various products is at an all-time high. We're hearing appliances are on shortage. There's a lot of homes that are in the process of being finished, but their appliances still are nowhere to be seen. And obviously there's some long delays there as well. Later shortages are real. And if we take a look back as to where we started back in 2019, when places were forced to shut down, that took a lot of manufacturing plants off, let's say anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. And as they were able to get back into their regular operations, they weren't able to get back to full capacity due to the physical distancing guidelines that the government had in place at that time. So as soon as you start to have that backlog, it's really hard to make up for that lost time. And several of them, the manufacturing plants have been working extremely hard to get back to that full capacity, but it's obviously going to take a little bit of time. Transportation was also another really big one. Obviously, it started with on the rail side of things, trucking, ocean freight, and containers. It's a big part of it. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in a moment. And then we're also going to see some building code changes as we work towards net zero. And as we work towards the steps that to get there, we're going to see some increased requirements on insulation as an example, which will put further pressure on material needs. And the realities at the manufacturing plants, obviously they've had, some of them have had fires. They do need to shut down for equipment maintenance, and it's just part of the reality of their situation. So what that has created, and some of the terminology that we're really hearing right now, is product allocations has become a big one, and I'm sure all of you are experiencing this to some extent. With the demand for product and the all-time high, it's everyone is trying to make everyone happy and ensure that they're able to get materials so that they can keep their business going. But obviously that's a challenge when there are shortages. The longer lead times, clearly you've experienced that. We were even chatting with one of our members who supplies heavy equipment, and they've got 9-month lead times at least due to the steel shortages and everything that's happening. So certainly something that they're trying to manage. That puts additional pressure on the rental fleet. And of course, more and more organizations are needing to figure out ways to repair some of their equipment because they can't actually physically replace it at the time being. There are some suppliers that are no longer serving various markets. We have heard of various companies that have pulled out. Knopf Insulation, as one of them, is pulled out of Western Canada. The Hardy board, I'm sure you've heard about that, is not being supplied to Western Canada either. Obviously, that creates a lot of issues because you've got unfinished projects. You were anticipating this information, and now it adds pressure onto some of the other suppliers who may not necessarily be able to keep up with that demand. And it's created a lot of price volatility. I think it's unfortunate, but we're starting to get used to the whole, well, there's another price increase. And I'm sure all of us have seen it, whether you're going to the grocery store, whether you're going to even to a restaurant, you're starting to see some of that inflation come onto the menus, and a huge reality. And it's something that's going to continue until we get caught up. We're starting to track, we're hearing members who normally would never track completion rates on homes because we've never run into this issue are certainly starting to do that. So it's adding a different challenge to their business as well, because they're trying to project what materials they need to produce in order to get those completion rates. We've also seen that communication with product suppliers has never been more important. One of the things we learned last year is there was all this, there was some finger pointing happening. I mean, we're beyond that now, but the big thing that we really wanted to stress was how important it is for everyone to communicate. Everyone down the supply chain is impacted by something, and the more that we can communicate and the more that suppliers know what materials are needed, the better off we can be. And I think just as a society in general, we got very used to the on-time delivery or having materials ready, available when you just want to walk in and purchase what you need. We've lost that luxury for this time being. So it's really important to keep those communications and to really communicate the product needs as well, because that will be important as we move forward. And government programs have either had a positive or a negative impact. We know that the CERB program continues to be extended, and I'm sure all of you on the line have probably had to deal with that to some extent. And it's a real issue. We certainly have seen business owners who have had to take on different roles. They've had to focus on procurement of products. Some of them have had to take on deliveries because they don't have enough staff. And so there certainly has been a shift in some of the responsibilities on a day-to-day, and clearly that has an impact on people's well-being, and both mentally and from a physical perspective. So I just wanted to dive into a little bit more detail on some of the product side of things. We did talk about the manufacturing piece and access to raw materials. Everyone is certainly fighting for that. And we're still trying to fight through some of those labor shortages. We've talked about the PPE and the shipping backlogs, which certainly have created a bottleneck. And it's going to be difficult to get past some of those, especially because everything is being impacted. And when we look at some of the manufacturing issues, even if they were able to get caught up to some extent, they have limited storage space. So To give you an example, last year, when lumber mills were producing lumber and getting back to making sure they were able to supply the need, they were having an issue with getting rail cars, and they would only receive a certain percentage of rail cars that they actually requested in order to transport the material. And we know that rail is highly necessary for big loads such as lumber, steel, and those heavy type things. But we're also competing with agriculture, oil and gas. So there's a lot of factors that are part of that. And it took months. When we were first having this discussion back in March, there was supposed to be, CN as an example, was supposed to be back up to 100% by September 1st, by Labor Day. And that didn't happen. And a big part of it had to do with some of the collective bargaining agreements. Employees had 15 days to report back to work. Once they did, they needed to go through some of that safety training again. So all of that took time away from being able to transport material. And in the meantime, you've got congestion happening at the ports in terms of containers. You have materials that are being produced that are now creating a bit of a halt on the manufacturing process because people were running out of space in order to store that material. So certainly that was an issue. And I'm not sure if you've seen any recent pictures, but I was in BC a couple of weeks ago, and it was pretty interesting to see the pileup of containers. I don't think I've ever seen that before, but in fairness, I never used to really pay that much attention to it until I started to work in this industry. We did talk about some of the transportation and logistics. One of the biggest issues that we're facing right now from the global supply is the actual ocean freight and the transportation from that perspective. Any type of materials that were in containers, we were looking at, kind of at the bottom end was a $3,000 US bill for a container to be transported over. The inflation on that has gone anywhere from 20,000 to over 30,000 as well. And there's a lot of products that don't have those margins to cover that. So clearly that's creating a lot of issues. And even then, the challenge with that is there's no guarantee that your product is going to get where it needs to be, even if you're paying those escalated rates. So definitely some competition there. And then the other piece is with the port congestion as well, there needs to be some infrastructure invested into helping to deal with some of that. We know that there are 600 vessels that are currently in production to come on board starting in 2023. So it's not an immediate solution, but the challenge that's being faced right now is obviously that port congestion and not enough labor and maybe not enough innovation on that front to help support faster movement there. We do anticipate that the self-correction of this will only happen once there's a drastic drop in demand for consumer goods. We know we rely heavily on various countries for manufacturing and transport of various products, and that certainly puts a lot of strain on the entire supply chain. We also learned, if there wasn't enough hits coming, that the production capacity in China has been recently impacted due to power supply shortages. So that is going to now create further disruptions. And when I read that, I was kind of shocked because I sort of thought we were almost at the tail end of the hits just keep on coming, but that's clearly not where we are at. And the recent fires in BC did have a little bit of an impact with the fire that took place in Lytton. It was difficult for rail to get across through the west and also south of the border. But we are happy to report that the wildfire situation certainly has started to resolve itself here in September. Obviously, the natural disruptors, we just talked about wildfire season. It's a reality of forestry. The activity did have a short impact. It dissipated through September. Hurricanes certainly have impacted our ability to produce materials that need to go into so many other materials, so creating further delays. And it certainly has been impacting more than just the lumber side of things. And I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is the past truly does have an impact on where we are at today. If it wasn't for the mountain pine beetle, we would have had more access to fiber, and we likely wouldn't have been in as bad of a situation as we were. So if we want to take a look at some of the insulation, obviously insulation has been struggling in terms of being on allocation. There's shortages there. They're certainly impacted by the resins that need to produce a lot of the insulation materials. And the other thing we learned last year was that fiberglass is produced from recycled glass. And with the restaurants being closed across the country, there was a shortage in glass which was kind of surprising because I thought for sure there's a lot of people who compensated for that at home, but it just goes to show how various sectors truly do contribute to some of the materials without us really knowing it. Something that I thought was interesting to pass on to you. You might already know that, but I did want to share that. With the, sorry, just looked at another note. There's also delays. The delays in mineral wool are over 200 days. I'm sure you've probably heard that that's the case. And that now creates the effect of needing other materials. So fiberglass is now being more heavily relied on to compensate for that. So obviously an increased demand to promote that. So just continues to add to that, especially with the code requirements on new home residential construction. On the windows, doors, siding, and aluminum side of things, we were experiencing some shortages on the glass piece, especially if there were manufacturers that were bringing in glass from overseas. Producers who were producing glass locally or were obtaining glass locally didn't have quite that same impact. So they were able to take on some new customers as a result of that. But we were happy to report that the glass shortage is no longer an allocation, and that we are progressing along in terms of the manufacturing on that side. The aluminum shortages, however, are impacting the sills and other components. So we're going to see some delays and increases in prices. And every manufacturer is going to be at a different phase in terms of where they're struggling with some of their materials and production. Shipping containers obviously continue to be an issue and obviously impact this line as well. And it's not expected that these are going to really resolve until sometime in 2022. And we'll continue to follow that and provide updates as well. As we look at roofing products, the situation continues to be very similar to as it was in the past few months. Supply continues to be on location. Part of the issues have been granules, which are an issue. They're part of the actual production. So that obviously creates delays. We have seen some manufacturers also pull out of various markets for a short time frame so that they can support some of their key customers as well. And some of that loyalty certainly is something that we've seen over time, but it has had an impact on the Canadian market as well. Price increases are going to continue as well. I just want to be able to manage some of those expectations, and the plastic components obviously are impacted by the resins. So we'll continue to follow that whole resin piece as well. As we look at commodity lumber, OSB, plywood, treated wood, and engineered wood products, these products are becoming more readily available. We've seen the prices have come down dramatically compared to where they were last year. We have seen a recent slight bump in pricing on the commodity and OSB side, but it's minimal and nowhere near where we were last year. And the industry is not anticipating any supply issues at this time as we move forward. So a little bit of good news there. The demand for products certainly has shifted as restrictions. If we want to look at the reasons why, people are getting back to travel. In July, folks started to get back out to traveling across the country or just getting outdoors and spent time doing the fun things that they've missed out on. So that has shifted the demand from the DIY side. We're not sure where that might end up in the fall, but certainly for the time being has taken some pressure off. On the engineered wood product side, LVL continues to be a major limiting factor, and a big piece of it is the adhesive that's used to glue the panels together. Until the resin industry is recovered, we're going to continue to see that. And we have seen that joist supply is getting better and that prices are dropping. Steel is a topic that a lot of folks have been speaking about because there have been significant double-digit increases over this last year, and the continued instability is expected. We are anticipating 2 more price increases coming up in 2022. And the pressure on the steel industry is huge because there is the need for appliances, for automobiles and heavy equipment. So there is little to no inventory on those fronts. And of course, everyone's competing for that as well. Certainly some challenges on the offshore specialized manufacturing, which are creating some delays and some shortages. Steel studs are on high demand, and we know that the mill capacity is outstretched, so that is impacting all product lines associated with steel, whether it's siding, roofing, etc. On the moldings, interior finishes, and sealants, moldings, the product continues to be on allocations. The situation with moldings is expected to worsen before it gets better, so we're expected to see it get, in the next 3 to 6 months. We do expect the situation to be a little bit worse. There is record high demand. And one of the challenges that we have is North America is struggling to produce or to provide enough raw fiber in order to produce the materials. So we've had to supplement by reaching out to the South American market, but then you start looking at the transport issues, container issues, and that just adds to it. On the adhesives, finishes, and sealants side, raw materials have been the main bottleneck. Common theme. Price increases continue to be on the horizon as the demand remains high. So certainly something that we need to keep an eye out for. And I guess the big question is when will we see relief? And it's no one has a crystal ball, but the biggest thing that we need is for supply to actually catch up with the demand. And as we start working through some of these challenges, and as we pay attention to make sure that we're working with our partners to move things along, we're going to continue to see a lot of this volatility and shortages. Obviously, the labor shortages need to be rectified, and this is a hot topic. There needs to be urgency from all governments in Canada to get us back to normal. And with the extension of subsidy programs, that certainly doesn't help the situation. And certainly that is a large pain point for a good portion of our members, and certainly an area where we want to continue to communicate with the government, because we need people back at work. We need to be able to move things along. And that's an important part of the supply chain, is the human component of it. And infrastructure needs to be put in place to deal with some of the port congestion that will help clear some of where we are at today. So that's my general overview, excuse me. I can't share my screen with you yet, and I don't know why, but I do have building material updates that we send out on a regular basis to our members as well as to the broader construction sector. I did have one that I wanted to showcase to you, but what I'll do is I'll share the links for all of these with the hosts today, and we can be sure to pass that on. And if there are questions that you have, and if there's anything that we can do to help keep you informed, that's what we're here for. We realize that in order for us to get through this, we definitely need to work together and make sure that those communication lines are open, and ensure that we're staying on top of the issues so that we can do our best job in terms of on the advocacy front and making sure government is aware of some of the challenges and some of the things that they need to be cognizant of to make sure that we can keep moving forward.
Well, thank you very much, Liz. That was insightful, perhaps a little scary. Terry Adamson did share your website to everyone, and it is an excellent resource. Yeah, there's a lot of good materials there. So thanks for that. We do have a few questions and answers. So we'll just dig into these. And I think you touched on these a little bit. You know, the container issue, are there discussions with China? What might they do about it? What are they likely to do about it? I know you touched on the infrastructure. Are you aware of anything else being put in place to help that out?
So those are excellent questions. And when we met with Transport Canada, what we were really trying to get an understanding of is what international relations were happening with China at the time, and what they're doing to communicate some of those challenges. Basically, the response that we received is because the shipping companies are a private company, there's very little to nothing that can be done from that perspective. But I think it's something that really needs to be a topic. From my personal perspective is, as a country, I'm not sure that we've done such a great job on the international relations stage. So that certainly doesn't help us in terms of negotiating some of these issues and talking about it. We're hoping that that's going to start to shift. We've had our post-election. There's an issue that obviously has been resolved with what we all know about in terms of the international piece with Canada and China. We're hoping that that will start to alleviate things, and certainly something that we're going to continue to follow. We were awaiting information from Transport Canada on what some of these innovations at the port level are going to be implemented. We haven't yet received that document. We have followed up, but we'll continue to follow up because we really do want to be able to share that. I think it's really important for members to know what stages the government is at in terms of dealing with some of these larger issues, and maybe to provide even a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel so that there's an understanding of how we're going to get moving forward on this and what some of those long-term solutions are, because it's going to impact every business moving forward. I hope that answered the question.
I think it did. So again, from Pat Flannery, and it's a good question that a lot of people I know are discussing right now. And are you starting to see a shift towards just-in-time manufacturing, towards carrying more inventory? And let me add to that a little bit too. Is that contributing to hoarding issues?
So another excellent question. I think right now we're kind of in a place where hoarding is going to be very difficult from the shortage. Obviously, when you look at wholesalers as an example, they're going to try and buy as much as they can, or at least anticipate what it is that the needs are for the market. And this goes back to the whole communication piece. It's really important for contractors, for the construction industry, and even for the DIY market. If they're planning any projects, it's really important for them to communicate those needs, because that's where a lot of the purchase decisions are made, is to really understand what the materials are needed. Hoarding is going to be really difficult when there's shortages in raw materials and everyone's on allocation. We did see some panic buying back in November when, I'm not sure if you recall, but there was a little bit of a dip in lumber prices. And one of the reasons why, one of the contributing factors to it bumping back up sort of just in December, is that there were some people who were panic buying because they wanted to make sure that there was enough material. Retailers want to be very cautious, and anyone wants to be cautious about how much material they're purchasing. And hoarding becomes less of a factor when you're paying escalated prices, because if there is a drop in the market, that is a significant hit that those businesses are taking. If they've purchased product that's at 400% higher than they would normally buy it for, they're not going to be able to make up that margin. So there is a lot of caution being exercised versus hoarding from the perspective of the industry. And there was a second part. Did I touch on the second part?
Yeah, I think you touched on everything.
Okay, good.
Then I'll just go through the last question from Patrick. And again, it's kind of, is it a big mistake by governments to stimulate demand rather than support manufacturing investment?
So a really excellent question. I think the whole stimulation truly became, was early on in the stages before the supply chain issues were so bad. And in fairness, anyone could have really knew what was going to happen. And I don't like the weather that happened in Texas. No one could project for that as an example. I mean, they never have a freeze like that. So it's, I think really what it comes down to is timing of when these conversations were had versus the support. And obviously support to move this along is really important. And if there is something from your perspective that you think we should be bringing forward to the government and to various stakeholders, we will gladly do that. We know that we contributed to some of the stimulation, but that was because we were focused on making sure that there was a plan for economic recovery and not anticipating that we would be in this piece. And we've even held back on promoting what those government programs are, knowing that our members are not able to keep up with the demand.
Well, that does it for the list of questions and answers. I'll turn it over to Alan, Nicole, if you guys have some further questions. And by all means, people chime in on online. We'll answer your questions. Great opportunity.
I do have a question. You mentioned that there were some companies that had pulled out of Canada due to supply chain, like the demand. And I'm just wondering, is for my business, I'm obviously importing a lot of stuff. Is there a list? Like, how do we find out, if, because you hear rumors, but just to be able to confirm?
Oh, for sure. So as part of the building material updates, we have been, anyone that has pulled out of Western markets, we've certainly been including that. I will be preparing another one, so I'll be sure to include a list of that, which I can share with you. This doesn't happen very often, obviously, but it certainly has been an issue that we've experienced. And a big part of it was the inability to supply or prioritizing some larger customers. Obviously, that was not good news to hear that was happening, because if you take a look at Canada and the US, we're a smaller market. And sometimes those business decisions are made by businesses to say, you know what, we want to make sure that we're giving the people who are the bigger piece of the pie, we want to make sure that they're getting that priority. And then it's unfortunate for their loyal supporters up north of the border who've now had to scramble to find other issues. So I'll gladly pull that list together for you, Nicole, and can send that out to the group.
Thank you.
So just a thought, Nicole, you know, as you've described the various you know, cascading effects of natural disasters, you know, and international issues adding to the, you know, adding to COVID, adding to all the other things, it's showing that we have a very widely distributed supply chains, right? They're global in scale, even for components that might be relatively inexpensive. You know, they're traveling a long way. So it's kind of showing that we're much more vulnerable to this kind of disruption than we thought. You know, we've had decades of trouble-free operation and just-in-time delivery, and everything's moving like clockwork, and all of a sudden the clock's broken. Has this led to discussions around sort of systemic approaches, or are companies beginning to think differently? You know, especially I would think maybe manufacturers, you know, are they starting to think differently about their supply chains?
So that's an excellent question. And we have had some conversation with some of our manufacturers to say, you know, maybe it's time for us to start looking at having some more manufacturing take place in Canada and more locally so that we can better support North America, as an example. The challenge there then becomes what the consumers are willing to pay for materials. So, for example, we've relied heavily on China to be the machine to manufacture a lot of our goods and services that we buy, and it's certainly allowed for, you know, lower prices. Think of the dollar stores, think of the Walmarts. Those have all been companies that have thrived off of that type of pricing. But you're also not getting the same quality of material. And so now that we've had that culture, and this is the culture that we've grown up with for such a long time, there's a question of how are we going to change that? Because if we're going to be manufacturing more in Canada, that means we're going to be paying more for labor because of legislation, you know, minimum wage requirements, if there's unionized environments. So all of that adds on to the pricing factor. And we have seen there's a higher carrying capacity for materials, but I think people are accepting it because they think it's a short-term solution. And that's going to be a difficult hurdle to get over. And when we look at even on the building materials side, when you look at the big box stores, they often will dictate a lot of the pricing. And as a small business, everybody wants to be able to invest in their business. They want to invest in their employees. They want to be able to grow and be able to offer more, but you need to be able to have margins that allow for that. And when you have your larger competitors that you are truly fighting against, really being able to, due to the volume of products, they've got their loss leaders. If they're driving down the pricing, that then impacts everyone else. So we're kind of stuck in a bit of a vortex here. Is that, well, you know, we need to start changing consumer mindset. If we want to see more labor and more locally made products, we have to accept that we're going to be paying more for it. And we need to be able to understand that. And businesses also need to accept that, you know, maybe this is where we need to be cautious about where we're putting our pricing levels at, because we realize we want to be able to serve our community and continue to do so. So there isn't a simple solution there. I don't know if you want to have further discussion on that, but if anyone else wanted to chime in on that piece, but that's from my perspective and from the conversations we've had, that's the challenges we see in terms of bringing more manufacturing, let's say within our own continent.
I think that's very well said.
You know, we had our session yesterday was about, we started off this conference with Tony Clement speaking about an initiative he's involved with called Reshoring Canada, where they're looking at, you know, critical supply chains from a national point of view and trying to be less dependent on foreign sources. And you know, it might be it might be easier to tackle that on some sort of high level items like maybe critical minerals or something like that. But as you say, you know, when you bring it down to more of the retail level, and as you say, organizations like big box stores, you know, still can be the ones who drive prices, and that might limit the ability of smaller Canadian companies to actually find a market for locally made but more expensive products. So presumably the largest suppliers are still going to be looking for the lowest cost products, and they will have better access to those than smaller local companies will.
And you know, as you're talking, it kind of reminds me that through this whole pandemic, we've heard from the government how our economy runs on the back of small and medium-sized businesses. And I think if we want them to continue to thrive, we need to start focusing on how maybe we can help them a little bit more in these types of situations. And when they're struggling to have labor, if they're struggling to have their employees come back because they're getting paid to be at home and playing video games, that's not giving them the support that's in line with how they value them as a contributor to the economy. So definitely worth some broader discussion as we move forward.
Do you know if anyone's discussing this with governments at this stage?
Well, we have, I think everyone has been addressing it to some extent. I know that we have put this forward several times. We've brought it forward. We have seen no action on it. We've tried to even have some more meetings with some different government representatives from our region so that they can truly understand the challenges. One of the things that we're in the process of doing right now is we want to build a case so that we can have some traction on that discussion. One of the things we learned last year is in order for us to move forward with a tax credit, we really needed to build a case for support. We conducted an economic impact study, which really highlighted the impact that our industry has on our local economies, our broader economy, and the amount of people that are employed in the tax dollars that generates. And we need to do the same for the labor issues. We really need to get an understanding of where some of those gaps are, because we want to start addressing them with programming. And from our perspective, we want to start working with younger ages. We want to get into the high school curriculum, and we started to actually make some progress. Actually, Eddie Cho, who you know, is part of working with us on that piece. And as we started to make traction, we had to put a pause on that due to COVID. So from the labor perspective, we really need to build a case to the government to showcase what the issues are, what the long-term impacts are going to be, and how they can support to make sure that we don't start to experience that. When you look at the location of, let's just say, the small lumber store, they're in 330 communities across the Western provinces. A lot of those are in small towns. Even Wizard Lake is an example, in little remote communities. And so they're an important component to building the infrastructure. They provide jobs for the local community. They support the charities or any type of sports teams that are there. They're critical to the infrastructure. So we want to make sure that there is some type of support to make sure that there is education, that there is good jobs, and that there are folks who are aware that this industry is an amazing place to work. And so that's something that we're working on with the government, and probably an area maybe as an entire construction industry where we can start maybe working together. We have a louder voice if we pool our resources through our actual collective membership. We have thousands of businesses that can certainly make an impact there.
Yeah, I had one more question come in from Patrick Flannery, which actually you lead into this wonderfully. Has there been an impact to labor because of the pause of immigration to Canada?
Oh, 100% there is. There's no question that has an impact. A lot of when you look at it, especially a lot of the rural communities, that's where there's a lot of planning that takes place. A lot of infrastructure is invested in those communities to make sure that as there is immigration coming in, they are set up, the community is set up to accept folks from various parts of the world and make sure that they have a home, make sure that they have a community that their families can be a part of. And by not having that, it certainly has created an impact. And You know, we have a lot of, there's a lot of jobs that are available out there. And as Canadians, we have a tendency to maybe be a little bit more picky about what it is that we want to do. And the reason why we rely on immigration is because Canada is such a great place to live. And when you're transitioning from a different part of the world, you have a whole different opportunity by coming here. And so it's certainly something that that has been an issue and hopefully will change as the borders start to open up.
Thanks. All right, well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Al, would you like a last word?
Well, I was just thinking that we had a presentation from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business yesterday, also in our opening session of this conference. And I don't know if you know, but basically all Fenestration Canada members are automatically members of CFIB. I'm wondering, whether there's a large overlap between, let's say, WRLA members and CFIB. I mean, I'm sure a lot of your members are large organizations, you know, but just this thought comes to mind that, you know, do you organizations such as you and they possibly work together on some of the issues you're talking about? You know, we need to sort of communicate to governments the value of making sure that, you know, businesses can operate sustainably and sort of the benefit of you know, better economic activity, better tax revenues. In other words, you know, so anyway, just a thought whether you guys do work together or whether it's even something to consider with other partner organizations to help to build these cases.
Really excellent question. And partnership is certainly something that is a priority for us. We did actually, it's funny you bring up CFIB. Some of our members are a member of them. I did reach out to them early last year to try and connect and partner, and I never did actually hear back. So I did follow up a couple times, but I honestly ended up having to focus on other things at that point in time. So we didn't partner there. Obviously, this is a reminder that maybe we need to start having those discussions again. From a partnership perspective, we did work with the Retail Council of Canada, and we have been closely working with the construction associations as well as the home builders associations. We felt that on those areas where we have some common issues, it's best for us to work together. And the more voices and the more resources that each of us have that we can pool, it certainly helps to create that impact. But I'm glad you brought that up, because this is certainly something from a labor perspective that I think we need to take a look at. So I made a note for myself to follow up on that again.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Rick? So are any more that you want to say, Rick?
I just see another Q&A come in, and it's from Pat Flannery again, who's always
Thanks
with
for all
us.
the questions, Pat.
He says, sounds like Western window and door manufacturers should all be WRLA members.
Yes, they
I think
should.
you'll agree.
Yes,
Awesome.
They should. And we have our trade show coming up in January. So we'd be happy to have you. So you can't see my presentation, unfortunately. What I'll do is I'll type my email address. I can't even type it into the chat because I can't access it. So if one of you would be kind enough to type my email address, which is lkovach@wrla.org. And my cell phone number is 204-770-2416. Feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to add you onto our communications list. I will send out the communications to the panel chair and obviously with Fenestration Canada, but happy to answer any questions and help out. And if you're interested to get involved, we would love to see that too.
Well, you know, it's been a pleasure to have you, Liz. You've painted a very comprehensive picture. Honestly, it was very interesting, you know, for some of us to be exposed to just the complexity and the range of issues that you've outlaid for us. So, thank you very much for sharing with us. We appreciate your enthusiasm, and And really thank you for coming and being with us to share your perspective with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with you guys again.
Yes, it sounds like it would be worthwhile for Fenestration Canada and WRLA to connect perhaps more often.
I agree.
Anything more from you, Nicole or Rick?
Just yeah, thank you for all the valuable information. And I think my takeaway is, you know, as individual companies, we just have to try and be as proactive as possible and really communicate with customers and just everyone. So thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much, Liz. It was truly great. We have a lot of positive comments coming in from the chat about how good it was. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsor again, Roto, and also a reminder to check out the WRLA website, wrla.org. I know a lot of you guys saw the website pop up during Liz's talk. Ton of good information there. And Liz, I have a special gift for you for doing this, and
Really?
I'll explain it first. Well, there's a story behind this. So what I got for you is this nice Winnipeg Jet COVID mask that my mother, when COVID hit, started making masks, and she decided to do some of the NHL teams. Triple layer, has the band in it and adjustable straps. So if you give me your address, I will get this off to you, and thank you so much.
I will send that to you. Thank you very much. As you could tell behind me, I'm a very proud Winnipeg Jets fan. So I will gladly wear it to the hockey games when I go back. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You go to the games
Great.
with your husband.
You betcha.
Well,
He has
then
no choice.
Then I'm going to send you two then.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And we have Liz's contact information in the chat window. So I think as we close this session, Steph, maybe you could just leave that open to give people time to do a screen capture or get Liz's contact information from the chat window. So
Yeah, that works. No problem.
great. Well, thank you very much. It was a great session. Really appreciate you joining us, Liz. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Rick. And we'll encourage people to hang around and take part in the next session in about an hour. So thanks, everyone.